From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Donald J. Trump, the 45th president of the United States, is now sworn in as the 47th president. He said in his inaugural address that today is Liberation Day and the golden age of America begins right now. We'll break down the inaugural address and what it heralds about his actions going forward on day one of the administration. Plus, President Biden literally in his last hour issues blanket pardons for his siblings and in-laws. Those are our subjects on this important day in American history, the 60th inauguration of an American president. Welcome. This is Potomac Watch, the podcast of the Wall Street Journal opinion page. I'm Paul Gigot, the editor of those pages, and I'm here with my colleagues, Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. Let's listen to a couple of clips from the inaugural address. First on that golden age, and then about Trump and what he says is his sense of destiny.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first. Over the past 8 years, I have been tested and challenged more than any president in our 250-year history, and I've learned a lot along the way. The journey to reclaim our republic has not been an easy one, that I can tell you. Those who wish to stop our cause have tried to take my freedom and indeed to take my life. Just a few months ago in a beautiful Pennsylvania field, an assassin's bullet ripped through my ear. But I felt then, and believe even more so now, that my life was saved for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again.
Well, two of the more interesting sections from the inaugural address. Bill, you've observed these kinds of speeches in the past. I don't know if you actually wrote one. I can't remember. But the golden age line, I just want to hit that first because there was also another companion line later in the speech where he said the American decline is over. And it struck me that that's a much more optimistic tone. And the speech had a more optimistic tone throughout, certainly than the 8 years of American carnage 8 years ago when we heard in his inaugural address, American Carnage. And I thought that struck a note that I think a lot of people are going to like.
I agree with you entirely, Paul. That was what I thought of when I heard him say it. It comes from experience in the White House. Now knowing what people are kind of looking for is also interesting to me. I may be reading too much into it, that he delivered this address forsaking his trademark red tie for a purple one. I've never seen Trump wear purple before.
What is the meaning of purple, Bill?
Well, I think it's like Obama saying there's no red states or blue states, just purple. I don't think it was accidental. I mean, Trump is almost always in a red tie, and if he's not, he's in a blue tie. So this is kind of surprising to me. So yes, he did talk about what he thought he inherited from Joe Biden, kind of dark about things, but the confidence is people that are optimistic. Optimistic doesn't mean you say there are no problems. What it means is that you say, yes, there may be problems, but if we rely on the old American virtues and hang together, we can lick them. And I think that's what Trump was trying to convey. Now, he went off a little at the end. It was very Trumpian in the sense, at one point when I thought he was wrapping up, he got into a mini State of the Union outlining his executive orders, but the crowd seems to love it. So there you have it.
In the beginning of the speech in particular, Kim, there were some very tough moments. This was after the golden age point where he really hit hard on what he called a radical and corrupt establishment that has seized power from the American public. I mean, he mentioned several things about the condition we're in, some of which struck me as a little more dire than, in fact, the facts on the ground and in the country suggest. He called about many betrayals that have taken place and then said the American decline is over. What was your overall sense of the speech and its tone?
I love the tone. I mean, yes, there were some dark moments, but if you think about this last election, I think one of the things that America has been tired of and rejected in rejecting Kamala Harris is that even though she was out there and she ran this campaign supposedly of joy, nobody believed it, because what they'd been told the past 4 years is that America was a country you should be embarrassed by. It's a country that was rooted in systemic racism, that we were sort of marauders abroad and at home, and these power structures that needed to be dismantled and reshaped. Remember the entire equity. We no longer talked about being equal under the law, but everything had to be equitable under the law, the DEI initiatives to handle all of this. And it was essentially a very dark view that this was a nation you should be embarrassed by. I think it was very important that he spent time talking about, as Bill mentioned, these old-fashioned American virtues of strength and resilience. There was a lot of talk about confidence and the need for pride, America's history and the reasons to be proud of it. The other thing that I was struck by, Paul, is there was a couple of very notable moments where it was clear that Donald Trump wanted, and this goes to the purple tie, to be clear he was speaking for all Americans. So there was a line in there talking about how these wonderful things he intended to bring to the country, bring back to the country, were there for every race, religion, color, and creed. He made a point about how he wanted to take care of, for instance, bring prosperity to inner cities, very much sending a message that he wanted to see America great, but spread across the entire nation. And I think if you were a lot of the Americans who, for the first time, were just sick of Biden and Kamala Harris and voted Republican for the first time, that's a message that really resonates.
Your point, I think, is crucial there, Kim, about the Trump in his inaugural address 8 years ago with American Carnage was a dark message. But Biden's message in his own way, though he preached unity, he also had a dark message about the America that he was governing. And it was, we have, as you say, systemic racism. To use one illustration, though Biden didn't mention it, but America was founded as a slave nation, the New York Times 1619 Project, not in 1776. And I think it was crucial, Bill, that Trump harkened back to the America in the past. He's basically telling Americans, look, this is a good country with a great past. And don't be ashamed of it. In one line, he said, we are going to, people have been taught in the schools, our children have been taught to hate their country, and we are going to end that. And then that sets a stage for his ambition and aspirational parts of the speech, which talked about a variety of things now he's going to do and gets into the greatness idea. So, in that sense, I think it was also a very different tone from both his predecessor and his own first term.
Yeah, I think you're right, Paul. And I think the operative word of what you said is ashamed. Even more than President Trump, I think his supporters have been really grossly libeled for their views. Remember, Joe Biden, I think, has called them semi-fascists.
Sure did. Jim Crow 2.0, those
right.
grace notes.
And I think you once said in an editorial meeting many years ago, I think it was when Trump first came on, about MAGA. It means make America great again. The people who support that and wear the MAGA hats and the Trump things, they believe that. But they believe it literally for what it says, make America great again. They believe there's greatness in America and that we strayed from it a little with the kind of things you mentioned about teaching how racist we were and how it's been corrupt since the founding. And they don't have that belief. They believe that despite its flaws, it's still a force for good and so forth. And they're not ashamed. I think in the first inaugural, a lot of Trump supporters were kind of embarrassed to say they're for Trump and so forth. Not this time. I mean, the first time you had all protesters surrounding the inaugural weekend. First the inauguration, then the Women's March the following day. This time you don't see that. What I saw on TV this whole weekend is a lot of Trump supporters, MAGA supporters, coming out in the cold and snow because the guy that they think represents him wants to make America great again. They think that's a good thing.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about Trump's vow about lawfare, and now he will not undertake it in his second term when we come back. Welcome back to Potomac Watch. I'm Paul Gigot here on our Daily Opinion podcast for the Wall Street Journal. I'm here with Bill McGurn and Kim Strassel. One thing that was interesting and pointed in my view, Kim, was that there were no grace notes about Joe Biden. There was a reference to him at the start, obviously, in the list of presidents he was recognizing for their attendance, but there were no grace notes. Instead, there was a list of what he deems to have been Biden's failures, and especially as the clip we listened to showed, a real attack on the condition Biden has left the country. Do you think he missed a chance there to show a little generosity to his, I guess you could call him the interim president between the two Trump terms?
He probably did, Paul, although this is Donald Trump. And so you're right. Well, he did not take an opportunity to throw in a grace note. We might be happy that he actually didn't call him out by name in this in his inaugural. That would be something that you might expect from Donald Trump. Look, I think it would have been good had he done that, even if it was just a very generalized nod to the respect due to the office of the president and Joe Biden in sitting in that office. Although I would also note there is not a lot of love lost there. And we should note that Joe Biden in his time in office was exceptionally tough by name on Donald Trump, and right up to the end was taunting him. I mean, he used his memorial at Jimmy Carter's funeral to essentially lob some missiles at the Trump camp to suggest, and recall January 6th. And he was pretty hostile to his incoming predecessor. He made nice, smiled. There was a couple of these meetings that they had, et cetera, but all the while, his administration was also, as we know, basically setting up hurdles and landmines as well for the incoming administration. So I think he did miss it. It was probably asking a bit much for Donald Trump to go gracefully into that direction.
Yeah, probably. I think there's a very important part of the speech I want to have us listen to, and that's where he promised not to ever repeat the use of what we can summarize as lawfare. Let's listen.
Never again will the immense power of the state be weaponized to persecute political opponents. Something I know something about. We will not allow that to happen. It will not happen again. Under my leadership, we will restore fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law.
Bill, I thought that was a real important marker, because if he means it, it suggests that he will not have his Justice Department, not have his FBI pursue his political enemies. And I think that would be crucial to a successful term, because I think if he goes down the path of retribution, that stuff never ends well.
Right. I firmly agree. In that sense, I think Joe Biden's pardons that he issued the same day, right before Trump was taking his address, I think that the pardons he issued were so outrageous. And to do it at the last minute, just like when he pardoned Hunter Biden after months of assuring us that he wasn't, they're really bad the way he did it and everything. But in a way, it's a gift to Trump. It reminds people how dishonest Joe Biden was all along, proclaiming first that he came in to unify the country and then taking all these divisive steps. It's not going to look good for Joe Biden's legacy, that he seemed to cover up his family's role in enriching themselves by capitalizing off his name. But it also spares Trump the temptation of going after them. Because I think, as much as it might be fresh now, if you went after these people, even Hunter, and I grant that they did really sleazy things, I think a year from now, first of all, it's not guaranteed any would be convicted of everything. It may look just as bad if Trump's going after the losers of the election than when they went after him. So I think, in a way, it's a perverse favor to Donald Trump.
Kim, I want to put the discussion of the Biden pardons off a little bit and just finish up on the speech some. It did veer off into what was more of a State of the Union type list of his agenda items. Immigration laid down, we're going to do the following executive orders. Inflation, we're going to focus on that. We're going to change the U.S. trading system in particular, and the Green New Deal environmental projects. Let's listen to President Trump talk about what he plans to do on immigration.
Today, I will sign a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. It's all about common sense. First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border. All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy. I will end the practice of catch and release.
Kim, that was very policy-centric. On the other hand, those were all things that he did promise. And I would say, with the exception of the odd introduction of reinforcement of the pledge he's made since the election, he was going to take back the Panama Canal somehow, which was a strange thing to put into a speech promising to be a peacemaker, because that's not going to be peaceable in Panama if it happens. The interesting thing to me is about this point, leave aside the specifics, is that you have a Trump who this time around really knows what he wants to do, is vastly more experienced about how to do it. And he has a team around him who had lived through that before. And now they know how to really start fast. And I think that's what you're going to see here, is starting fast. You may not like what he does, but he is going to do it, and with some dispatch.
I was really struck by that, Paul, because all of us remember, or we should remember, that the first time he came into office, this level of knowledge and discipline was very much not on display. There was a lot of confusion still over who he was naming for cabinet positions. He just did not have a well-oiled machine. And his message from the moment he was elected, from the speed with which he named all of his top cabinet people, to the focus that everyone has been putting on these immediate executive orders, very much signals this is a guy who from day one intends to really break some China. And I wasn't surprised either that he did throw in all of this policy, because it's clear he is very focused on these initial executive orders. They are apparently they have set up a desk at the Capital One Arena where he is going to sit and sign them live today as part of the ongoing festivities. There will be apparently close to 100 of them. And he ran through them, the broad categories of the border, big focus on DEI and gender. He's going to dismantle a lot of those federal government programs. Obviously, trade, we got a mention of his new External Revenue Service, which he apparently is going to set up to collect all the abundantly flowing dollars that he predicts will be coming from foreign entities.
Just like what we need, a new federal agency.
Yes, a new federal agency. That did strike me, Paul. That's not getting much attention. And then obviously a huge focus on energy and the environment. And you mentioned the EV mandate that he says he's going to immediately try to roll back. One thing that really jumped out at me is just only from a kind of longer term policy implication. Apparently, he is going to both declare an energy emergency and a border emergency, which in both cases would allow him to take a lot of actions as a president that he wouldn't in the absence of an emergency. I am a bit concerned about that from a policy perspective. There was a lot of pressure on Joe Biden to declare a climate emergency, to give him similar powers. He didn't do it, but this could be a new standard as presidents come into office.
I agree with you about the potentially problematic nature of this. Emergency powers can be used for all kinds of purposes, sometimes necessary, oftentimes convenient politically. I mean, do we really have an energy emergency? I don't think so. We have had some bad energy policy that can be reversed.
Right.
Do we really have a border crisis? Well, you can make a better case for that. But I think some of the actions that Biden has taken in the last 3 or 4 months have actually reduced some of that, although we do have major tasks to try to get some of those criminal gangs out. But anyway, I think it's the use of emergency powers runs against Trump's promise not to abuse executive authority and to trim the power of the administrative of state.